广大的网友们，我希望得到大家的帮助。我是一名被拐儿童，我出生1990年左右，在1996年的冬天农历11月底腊月初被拐到河北邯郸。我记得我是跟着父母在他们打工的地方被拐走。我父母在外打工，带着我和姐姐租了一间房，在2楼。隔壁新来了一个邻居，是人贩子，跟我混熟之后把我带走。我记得我爸爸好像叫杨新民，我叫杨妞花，杨妞妞。我姐姐的名字我不知道是不是她名字，我就喊桑英这样的发音。我喊外婆是阿布代这样的发音。喊妈妈是妈伊是这样的发音。我记得我老家是住山区的，离火车道很近，站在猪圈上可以看到一个集市。
Welcome to Red Eastern True Crime. If you're a fan of gripping true crime stories, make sure to subscribe to my channel. Let's dive into the story. The girl in this video was abducted when she was 5 years old. She was born in 1990 in Zhejiang County, Bijie City, Guizhou Province, and her parents named her Yang Niuhua, with the nickname Niu Niu. She had an older sister, Sang Ying, who was 3 years older than her. They were a happy family of 4. When Niu was 4 years old, her parents, like many others in her village, left their rural home to seek better opportunities in the city. They moved to Guiyang, the capital of Guizhou Province, and rented an old apartment in an area full of migrant workers. Niu's father, aware of the chaotic environment, worried that his daughters might get lost or kidnapped. He often warned Niu and her sister to play only near the door, and not to wander far. He also insisted that they call him by name to get his attention quickly. Under his watchful eye, Niu and her sister learned to be wary of strangers. About a year later, the Yang family's new neighbors moved in: Mr. Gong, his wife, Yu Huaying, and their daughter, who was a few years older than Niu. On the first day, Mrs. Yu came to Niu's house to borrow bowls and chopsticks, saying they hadn't had time to buy their own. She returned the items the next day, and the Yang family instructed Niu and her sister to call their new neighbors, aunt and uncle. Mrs. Yu would often come by to borrow small items and return them with fruit or snacks for the children. Her daughter also played with Niu and her sister, and the 3 girls quickly became close, sometimes visiting each other's homes. One day, while playing at Mrs. Yu's house, Yu squatted down in front of Niu with a smile and asked, "Would you like a gift?" At first, Niu said she didn't want anything, but after thinking about it, she remembered how the women in her village used to knit sweaters. Intrigued, she said she wanted knitting needles. The next day, while Niu's parents were at work, Mrs. Yu's daughter knocked on their door and called Niu outside. Mrs. Yu said, "Didn't you want knitting needles? Auntie will take you to buy some." Excited, Niu didn't hesitate to go. Her sister Sang Ying tried to stop her, but Niu wouldn't listen. Mrs. Yu reassured Sang Ying, saying, "Stay here. I'll take your sister to go, and we'll bring something for you too." Niu also said to her sister, "Wait for me. I'll bring you something." Mrs. Yu took Niu on several buses, leaving her own daughter behind, and finally took Niu to the train station in Guiyang. They boarded a train heading north to Handan, over 1,600 kilometers away. At first, Niu didn't feel anything was wrong. But as the train moved farther away, night fell, and she began to cry, telling Mrs. Yu that she didn't want the knitting needles and wanted to go home.
第一次反驳的就是说我要回去，他就开始凶了，他就说你要是再不听话，拉开那个火车的玻璃，他说就把你从这儿扔下去。
5-year-old Niu was frightened and pretended to be obedient. A few days later, they arrived in Handan and temporarily stayed with an elderly man named Wang Guofu. For the next 10 days, Yu tried various ways to sell Niu, but many buyers were looking for boys, so it was difficult to find a buyer. As time dragged on, Yu became irritated and even withheld food from Niu to save money. The winters in Handan were much colder than in Guiyang, and Yu didn't even give Niu warm clothes to wear.
火车他曾经对我拳打脚踢， 包括到后面到了中间人家，我不知道是因为女孩不好卖还是什么原因，然后他还曾经拿开水烫我的头。
Eventually, you found a buyer. Unlike most people who wanted boys for adoption, this buyer was different. It was a family of two, a mother in her 60s and her son in his 30s, who was deaf-mute and physically disabled. They were poor, and the son's condition made it difficult for him to find a wife. The mother, realizing that her son would never have a wife, decided to buy a daughter to take care of him in his old age. The elderly mother scraped together 2,500 RMB, about $300, bought 5-year-old New, and renamed her Li Suyan. Yu left after receiving the money, but not before telling New, "I'll come back for you in a few days." Believing this, New stayed with her foster grandmother and foster father, waiting for Yu to return. Life in the new home was hard. The grandmother constantly reminded New of how much money she'd cost, and expected her to grow up quickly to pay off the debt.
见人就给别人讲我是买来的，他见人就讲花了多少钱，讲得清清楚楚的，来的时候穿了多烂，头上有虱子，穿得多脏，就时时刻刻的在讲，讲的也就像时时刻刻在提醒我。
Her foster father didn't like New either. He had hoped the money would be used to find him a wife, not to buy a daughter, and he resented New's presence. But for fear of his mother, he never dared to speak out against her. This dysfunctional family environment made New shy and anxious. She began doing housework, cooking, and working in the fields at an early age, and developed a people-pleasing personality. Even when she was mistreated, she didn't dare speak up, although that didn't stop her foster family from beating and scolding her. Her foster grandmother repeatedly told her that her biological parents had abandoned her, but New couldn't shake a vague memory of her real parents, her father holding her, gently feeding her a drumstick, and both parents smiling warmly. Although she tried to believe her foster grandmother, these fragmented memories left her in doubt. Outside the home, New faced ridicule and bullying. Her foster father's disability made him a target for the village, and New was treated similarly. Villagers would even tell her to her face that she'd been bought to be her father's future wife. She never argued back, always walking away in silence. These hurtful words deepened her dislike for her foster father.
他说他找那个人想把钱要回来，结果那个人跑了啊。因为他烦躁的时候，他会发出来声音，他哇哇哇的大喊，所以那个时候他一点都不想要，也做不了主，也没送走。慢慢的，因为在身边待久了嘛，就像养只小狗还有感情了。我养护一直以来，他做不了主，但是他从来没有做过任何伤害我的事情，还会背着我奶奶悄悄给1块钱，然后让我塞到那个鞋底下，让我别丢了，不要告诉奶奶。
New was a hard-working student with excellent grades. She knew that education was her only way out, but when she was in the 6th grade, her foster grandmother became ill, and New had to stay home to care for her. She was only 12 years old at the time. As her grandmother recovered and prepared to send her back to school, a visitor came to the house. The visitor took one look at New and warned her grandmother that a girl with such bright, intelligent eyes was bound to leave the village one day. "If you let her study, she'll never come back," the visitor said. Her foster grandmother agreed, and New was never allowed to return to school. Though she had always been obedient, her grandmother reminded herself to keep a close eye on the purchased child, to make sure she didn't run away. With no school, New wandered around the village feeling hopeless. Fortunately, a kind elderly aunt who lived next door took pity on New. She spoke to New's foster grandmother and suggested, "Why not let the child go out and work? She could earn money and send it home. Don't keep her cooped up in the house." Her grandmother took the advice and agreed. In 2003, at the age of 13, New went to the city to work in an ice cream factory, earning 270 RMB a month, about $32. It wasn't much, but New finally felt a small sense of freedom.
你在那儿的话，你就阳光，你去大笑，你去开玩笑，别人都不会觉得你这么惨，你还笑什么笑？所以觉得在外面还是比较轻松的。 你只管往家打钱就行，其他的什么都不用想。
After leaving the village for work, New returned home only once a year until her foster grandmother died. Years passed in this way. With no formal education or connections, New could only take low-paying jobs. While other children stayed at home with their parents or continued their studies, New was out in the world, facing countless struggles. In 2009, at the age of 19, New returned to her village to commemorate the first anniversary of her foster grandmother's death. During this time, a relative introduced her to a potential marriage partner, and after 6 months of getting to know each other, they married. Throughout her life, New had struggled with feelings of inferiority about herself and her family background. When a man offered to marry her, she accepted, hoping for stability. Fortunately, her husband and in-laws treated her with love and care. Soon, they had children of their own, and New found happiness in the completeness of her new family. But as a mother, she couldn't help but think about her biological parents. Who were they? What did they look like? Where were they? Why hadn't they come to find her? Had they really abandoned her? In the 1980s and 1990s, under China's strict one-child policy, some families abandoned their daughters in favor of a son. New often wondered if that would be the case with her.
这么多年我真的是吃了苦的呀，但是这些苦要给谁讲？我就等着回去想给父母讲，我想埋怨他们几句，我想说，你们知道吗？你们不找我，你们知道这些年我是怎么咬着牙长到现在的，我是玩了多少个心眼子，我是挨了多少骂，挨了多少打，挨了多少的流言蜚语，然后再活到现在的，我都想给他们说一下。
New had once seen a TV show called Baby Come Home, which featured stories of parents searching for missing children, and children searching for their parents. It inspired her to think about finding her own birth parents. In 2012, with the support of her husband and in-laws, New submitted her DNA to the National Database of Missing and Trafficked Children. She also reached out to anti-trafficking organizations to share her information, but nothing came of it. She even reported her case to police in several provinces, including Sichuan and Yunnan, but without knowing her birthplace or specific details, they couldn't open a case. While searching for her parents, New continued to build her life. She and her husband raised 3 children and opened a beauty salon in Handan, Hebei province. Over time, her financial situation improved. With the rise of short videos on social media, New noticed that people were using these platforms to reconnect with lost family members. In April 2021, she began posting her own videos on Douyin, China's version of TikTok, sharing the first photo taken of her after she arrived at her foster father's home, with her hair cut short. She pieced together fragmented memories, posting a series of short videos with photos and captions. On May 2nd, she stepped in front of the camera to tell her story, the very story we began with in this video.
站在猪圈上可以看到一个集市，还可以看到一个大山，山上面有一个山洞，那个洞周边都是被植物都长满了植物，跟山上植物一样。从小我经常就是在院子里面等我姐姐放学，我姐姐下学的时候她会从上坡走下来，具体学校在哪里我不太清楚，我当时还没有上学。我希望大家帮我扩散消息，让我的家人看到，帮助我早点回家，谢谢。
The video caught the attention of viewers. Many left comments offering clues and possible connections based on New's memories. Some pointed out that the way she addressed her mother and grandmother suggested that she might be from Guizhou province, suggesting that she might belong to the Miao ethnic group. Finally, the breakthrough came. New's cousin, 5 years younger, came across the video. She remembered family stories about New's abduction as a child. The day after seeing the video, she contacted New and informed her older sister, Sang Ying, who now lived in Nantong, Jiangsu province. New and Sang Ying were able to video chat. After 25 years, New was finally reunited with her sister. Both were overcome with emotion. They shared childhood memories and everything fit. Nu's memories had been right all along.
我第一句就是这么说的啊，我说妹妹你好，她说你好，我说妹妹你在找家吗？她说是的，她说姐姐你家也丢了孩子吗？我说对，然后尤其是她一问我姐姐你还记得吗？我们家有一个猪圈，我们在猪圈上面捉迷藏，后来我掉下去了，是你背着我去找妈妈的，摔得头破血流的。然后我说对的，我记得还有一个小姑，3个人。
But when Nu asked about her parents, her sister's answer broke her heart.
丢了之后，爸爸满地趴着打滚，然后我从来没见过一个成年人在地上就是爬着哭的，他在地上躺着，他来回滚着哭，他是没有办法，就特别压抑。
On the day Nu disappeared, her parents came home in the evening and realized she was gone. They panicked and knocked on the neighbor's door, but there was no answer. They got the landlord to open the door, only to find the room empty. The landlord had no information about the couple. In desperation, Nu's parents searched bus and train stations for her. Soon, her relatives from the village joined them to help. Her parents gave up their jobs and slept with Sang Ying near the station for 6 months, hoping to find Nu. Eventually, they ran out of money and had no choice but to return to the village. Nu's father couldn't cope with the loss of his daughter. He struggled to eat and turned to alcohol to numb his pain. Meanwhile, Nu's mother began to lose her mind. She would run out of the house in the middle of the night, convinced she could find Nu. Once, despite her illness, she ran up a nearby mountain, insisting that she had heard Nu calling her. Sang Ying, who was 3 years older than Nu, was only 8 years old at the time. She blamed herself for not stopping her sister from leaving that day, and her father, in his drunken moments, sometimes blamed her as well. The whole family was consumed by grief. A few years later, at the age of 39, Nu's father died of stomach bleeding caused by alcoholism. 6 months after his death, Nu's mother also died from health complications. She was only 32. After losing her parents, Sang Ying went to live with her grandmother and uncle. She also had to leave school at a young age to help with farm work. At 13, she began working on construction sites, and at 15, she was living and working in the city. Although her grandmother and uncle treated her well, Sang Ying lived with guilt and insecurity. With little education, she faced a life of low-paying and unstable jobs, and experienced even more hardship than Nu. A week after being reunited with her sister, DNA test results confirmed that Nu and Sang Ying were indeed biological sisters. Nu's abduction led to the early death of her parents and left her sister to grow up alone, causing immense tragedy for her family. Filled with anger, Nu vowed to find the trafficker responsible and seek justice. Many discouraged her, saying it had been 26 years and would be too difficult, or that the trafficker might not even be alive. But Nu was determined. As she reconnected with her sister, more childhood memories resurfaced. Back in Handan, Nu tracked down Wang Guofu, the local middleman who had helped Yu traffic her. Wang was now in his 90s. Years earlier, when Nu first searched for her family, she had confronted Wang, but he had refused to talk. Now that she had found her family, she pressed him again, urging him to do some good with the little time he had left. He hesitated, claiming he didn't remember much, only that someone named Yu had brought Nu to him. Upon hearing the name, Nu immediately blurted out, "Yu Huaying." Wang was stunned and asked, "How do you know that name?" Nu later explained that during the 10 days she spent with Yu, she heard people mention the name, and it stuck with her, though she once thought it belonged to a family member. In 2022, Nu traveled to Guiyang and visited the place where she had lived with her parents before she was abducted. She then filed a police report. Because of her previous efforts to find her family, Nu had gained some influence, and the police took her case very seriously. They immediately sent several task forces to investigate in both Guiyang and Handan. Soon, a woman named Zhang Yun came under police scrutiny. Zhang had lived in both Guiyang and Handan, and in 2004, she was arrested for trafficking children from Yunnan to Handan. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison, but was released in 2009 after serving only 5 years for good behavior. The police collected photos of Zhang Yun and other suspects for Niu to identify. When Niu saw the photos, she immediately pointed to Zhang Yun, confirming that she was indeed Yu Huaying. On June 30th, 2022, police arrested Yu Huaying in Chongqing. Based on information from middleman Wang, Yu had trafficked 11 children from 8 different families between January 1993 and October 1996, and had kidnapped 2 children from 3 of those families. It is unclear whether Wang's advanced age played a role, but he was never arrested, and the police did not even formally interrogate him. Instead, they simply talked to him and tried to persuade him to confess. Yu herself confessed under interrogation. She admitted that when she was younger she had a daughter with her husband, but after her husband was sentenced to many years in prison for theft, Yu began a relationship with a married man named Gong. They had a son together, but neither Yu nor Gong wanted to raise the child because Gong already had a family. Finally, they decided to sell their son for a few thousand RMB. Yu was not saddened by the loss of her son. Instead, she saw it as a quick way to make money. From that point on, child trafficking became her business. She carefully chose her targets, befriended them, and used her own daughter as bait. Once she had control of the child, she would take them directly to the train station and transport them to Handan, where she would sell them through Wang. On July 14, 2023, Yu Huaying's child trafficking case, which had shocked all of China, was brought to trial in Guiyang. Niu, her family, and other victims' families attended the trial. Niu testified as a witness.
于花英，你还认识我吗？
我认识啊。
认识是吧？
你
叫我于花英，我整整记了26年，我一直都记得。
Yu's former partner Gong had died several years ago after they split over personal disagreements. During the trial, Yu tried to blame Gong, claiming that he was the mastermind and she was just following orders, but the court did not accept her defense. They ruled that Yu was guilty of serious and unforgivable crimes and sentenced her to death. Yu appealed the verdict, and 2 months later, during the second trial, she admitted her guilt, saying she committed the crimes because she was too young.
于花英说她30，她当时年轻拐卖了我，但是她当时在拐卖我的时候，她已经30多岁了，她觉得她自己还年轻，走错了路。但是我的妈妈32岁的时候，她就已经躺在了坟里头。于花英偷我的时候，她的年龄比我的妈妈年龄还要大，所以我恳求一定要严判于花英。
The second trial did not result in a verdict. On December 27, 2023, the court ordered a retrial. The reason was that while questioning Yu's husband, who had a criminal record for theft, police uncovered evidence that Yu had trafficked more than 11 children. Several other cases were still under investigation. Niu's relentless pursuit of the trafficker responsible for destroying her family had led to the discovery of other children trafficked by Yu. Through Niu's influence, many other families were able to reunite with their stolen children. As her story gained attention, more and more parents of missing children sought her help. After Yu's arrest, Niu and her sister returned to their hometown in Zhejiang County, Guiyang, to pay their respects to their parents, weeping openly at their graves. Niu and her sister's families have since been reunited. She has also been reunited with her grandmother, aunts, and uncles. In addition to running her business, Niu is now actively helping other trafficking victims find their families and patiently waiting for Yu's case to be reopened. Child trafficking has been on the rise in China since the 1970s. Traffickers often targeted the children of migrant workers struggling to make a living in urban areas, where the chaotic environment made them easier to kidnap. Most buyers came from rural areas, typically families desperate for a son. Prior to Yu's death sentence, there was no precedent in China for sentencing a human trafficker to death. This channel will continue to follow the case closely, and any new updates will be shared with you. What do you think about this case? Please share your thoughts and opinions in the comments section. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more crime stories, please like and subscribe to my channel.